Hello, CIS27. This is part 1 of Unit 6 lecture video. And in this video, I'm going to start with talking about what we have to do this week. So for this week, if you look at Unit 6 module, you will find that you would need to read Chapter 6. And after that, you can view the notes and the videos. Then you need to complete the assignment. Then you need to complete the lab. And we have a homework assignment this week in that you have to read an article about malware and answer the question that's posted in the document for the assignment. So to start, we can find the notes on the following page of Unit 6 module after the task. And in the notes, we would be able to start with talking about threat actors. So by definition, open source intelligence just means gathering information from social media and website, simply Googling someone or an organization or an entity. And so this is the beginning process in gathering information. There are tools and resources that are available freely to be able to do that as an automated process. However, gathering information from social media and website would give you more details about the individual and or the organization. And why is this important? It's important to really focus on looking at the target. So for the attacker, they want to find out as much information about the individual or the organization as much as possible. Then in the threat actors category, we have the script kiddie, who are attackers that use scripts or code that are available via the web or dark web and to be able to launch attack. Now, this group is a little bit more dangerous than your normal gray hat and the white hat, because the script kiddies, they don't really understand the true consequences, and sometimes they don't care about regulations and law that are in place related to cybercrime. They lack expertise and sophistication, and they don't have a lot of funding, so they would take higher risk in the form of attack that they use. Now, another group that would be related to threat actors would be hacktivists. And Anonymous, if you heard of Anonymous, they would be in the category of hacktivists, as the attacks launch would be related to some form of movement, or there would be a cause for the attack. It could be for political reasons, and there could be many reasons. However, it would be for some form of activism or activist movement. Then you also have insider threats. That could be anyone that had legitimate access to the internal resource of an organization. This could be an employee, and that person can leak data to the outside source, or it could be somebody that's being planted in the company so that way they can infiltrate and obtain proprietary information, design, etc. So an example would be that if Boeing design of a plane is highly proprietary, there might be engineers that could be bought, or engineers that are planted by organizations or nations in the company in order to obtain secrets and design and resources for to sell or to reproduce something that's similar to what that company has. Then you have competitors that could be taking advantage and trying to engage in attack to gain information, to deter customer, to cause negative impact for the organization. Now, in the organized crime area, that could be enterprise or groups that would be employed in criminal activities, such as laundering money, selling drugs, human trafficking. And so a lot of these activity could be related to the cybersecurity area in that, information can be exchanged via encrypted chat, um, exchange of data that is through channel in the dark web. And the motivation behind organized crime is usually money. Um, and in some cases, you see attackers performing different type of attacks for other causes, like for fame, for recognition, but the majority of the time that will be financially driven. Then you have advanced persistent threat, and advanced persistent threat simply encompasses the targeted attack against a network, and that this could be sponsored by nation state or government. So you can think about how China can have a group of attackers that would aim for specific resource, or even Russia. So in the example I include here, we see the APT-1, which is operated over 60,000 people Liberation Army, PLA, inside China. And they use well over 1,000 server to release malware, to create waterhole, which are websites that could include malware or resources that could negatively impact the organization that access those sites or individual that access those sites. That could be used to steal data from organizations. And so in this type of network, you would see that they would use resources like email, they would penetrate network, they would acquire data and information over years without being detected sometimes. And APT-28 is known as Fancy Bear, and Fancy Bear is sponsored by Russian government. They've been in operation since mid-2000. APT-29 is Cozy Bear, and the list can continue. So these are just a few examples of advanced persistent threat. Then you have the general attack that's performed by different attackers, not necessarily organized group. And often you would find that the general attack will fall under the category of denial of service or distributed denial of service. So in denial of service, you have a single source aiming at one target, where distributed denial of service, you have multiple sources aiming at that target. And basically, denial of service, its intention is to cause disruption or exhaustion in the normal operations or for the network traffic. And part of our responsibility in cybersecurity is to make sure that our resources have integrity. We protect confidentiality of the individual that's using the information and data, and making sure that it's available to the people who needs it. So CIA are the goals behind cybersecurity, and when we are being attacked, if you're facing denial of service or distributed denial of service, that takes away availability. And when you have data leak or breach of data, then it becomes there is jeopardy against the other areas in cybersecurity. So in the first few questions, we can answer question 1. You can list at least 2 threat actors, and so here I put down there's insider threats, hacktivists, or script kiddies. And you can list additional if you are able to do that, that's fine. For question 2, we want to define what is advanced persistent threat, and it is a targeted attack against a network. It's sponsored by nation, state, or government. So in the next area, we're going to talk about malware. And malware in general is just malicious software that can cause negative impact to individual system or a network. And so under the category of malware, we would see virus, and virus is just malicious code that attaches itself to the application. of a system or a host, and it requires that system to execute the code, so the user has to intervene. Whereas the worm it self-replicate, and it can travel through the network without being any assistance of the user or the user interaction. So the difference between the virus and the worm in that the virus requires human interaction. It requires the host to carry and execute it. So the user usually would be tricked to download it. So often you would see malware being incorporated with social engineering to entice the user to download. Like, for example, I love you virus. People think that it is a love note, so they download the attachment, and that attachment would then be ran once they open it. Okay. And then for the worm, it doesn't need that. It would self-replicate. And so containing the worm would be a little bit more difficult compared to the virus. And there are many different types in each category. So for the next question in our assignment, it asks for the difference between the virus and the worm for question 3. So the virus is a malicious code that attaches itself to the host application, and it needs the host to execute and run the code. To continue, next we're going to talk about logic bomb, and logic bomb is just a string of code that's embedded in an application. It will execute based on the event of the response of the event. So for example, it's going to wait for specific logic to happen. Like if the user open a certain application 10 times, then it will activate the code and launch. So with logic bomb, what you see is that it often is embedded into a specific application that would be then downloaded. So it is harder to detect. So for the next question in our assignment, it asks you what is a logic bomb, and you can simply state that the logic bomb is a string of code that's embedded in an application in which execute in the response of a certain event. So it could wait for specific sequence of events or something that occurs, and it would then be activated. Now, in some cases where we would see backdoor being left in software, and this is another way that the system or the application can be accessed by developer. It usually would bypass the authentication methods, and it would give the developer or the user that access the backdoor a higher privilege in that system or in that application. So in such case, the backdoor can be used to negatively impact the system, where an attacker can utilize that backdoor or leave a backdoor where they can come back and be able to navigate through the network or access different resources of that system to be able to obtain data and information. So based on the notes, what we can do is we can answer the question, why do attackers use backdoor? And they use backdoor to bypass the normal authentication methods, because when the user authenticate, that user authentication process is being tracked and logged. So if they use a backdoor, they can bypass the authentication methods in which their access information will not be logged. Their identity will not be recognized or recorded. Now, part of malware is the Trojan Horse, and Trojan Horse, just like the story, it masquerades something beneficial, but it has malicious code, meaning that it hides itself in some common application or application that the user often would access. So now inside once it's masquerade, you would see that there's malicious code that would activate. So a common Trojan horse would be like a keylogger. That would be hiding itself in some form of small download file, like a fake game. And once the user downloaded to the phone or the smartphone or the computer, it would then keylog every characters that the user input onto the keyboard. And why do they do that? They would use it toward accessing your bank account, your financial information, your healthcare information. So Trojan horse sometimes is just a way that they masquerade something that would either leak data or damage your systems in some way or form. So it is a malicious code, and it often is masquerading itself in another form of application that the user commonly would use. And they would use social engineering to trick the user in accessing this type of application. Then we have the remote access Trojan, which is the RAT. And this is a type of malware that allows the attacker to take control over the system remotely. So once that this is launched, they're able to take over the system, navigate, open your files, change your configurations, disable account, etc. So it would be higher in malicious intention compared to the regular Trojan horse. Then you got ransomware, which is very common, and ransomware is used to deliver encryption to users' data, and this is sometimes called crypto malware. There are different type of ransomware, and what they would do is they would require a ransom in order to decrypt, but usually when the people pay, they will not be able to get the encryption key, or even if they get the encryption key, the data has already been corrupted. So in most cases with ransomware, when people pay, they won't be able to retrieve the data completely. So to really address a lot of the negative impact, a lot of the issues that would caused by malware is we would consider having backup of data. We want to make sure that we have live scans for our malware in our network and our systems. And even on the mobile devices, we want to make sure that we have applications, security applications that will be able to look at attachments that's coming in, making sure that we scan for malicious code. And keep in mind that only about 50 to 60% of malware are recognized or detected in the wild, meaning that all the malware that's floating around in the internet, what you see with the way that we detect malware is that it has to be known to the anti-malware company by definitions or by behavior. So sometimes malicious code could exist, but then it won't be detected or it goes undetected because it's not known or reported. So having anti-malware applications installed on your system is good. However, it doesn't secure your system 100% against malware. So we really have to be cautious in the behavior on what we access, what type of information that we give out to specific web resources, and even understanding what type of risk when we're downloading attachments and accessing downloads on different websites. So earlier I mentioned keylogger, and keylogger is a form of Trojan. It simply attempts to capture the keystrokes from the user, and it would take the record of the keystrokes and forward that to whoever that's receiving it. Could possibly be the attacker that's intending to do this, so that way they can obtain your username, your password, things that you type into your system via the keyboard. So coming back to the questions, For the next question, it asks about the purpose of ransomware. And ransomware is, it delivers encryption to user data, and usually it would ask for ransom, which is money, to decrypt the data. And it simply encrypt the hard drive or storage drive. So in the case where if you're looking at smartphone and mobile devices, it will encrypt the storage, where the system would no longer be available to the user, and in order to access it, you have to get the decryption key, the key in order to decrypt and access the data. And for spyware is just to monitor the user's computer and activities. And we would see a lot of this being used for, they call it business analytics, where they, companies want to study your spending habit, your the consumer trend, etc. So a lot of the browser, when you're surfing the internet, it's listening, it's watching, it's recording your activity, and then sometime that would get forwarded and being sold to third party, where they can market you the type of things that you would purchase. So spyware can be installed in the user system without their awareness, and its purpose is just to monitor the user's computer and activity. So that way the information could be sold for marketing purposes, for advertisement, etc. Adware, its intent is to look at users' habit and also target it for advertisement. Bots are software robots, and they're used to look for information on the web or access resources on system. And now you would see that bots are incorporated with social media, right, to post, to share fake news, etc. And botnet is basically a network of software robots, and botnets can be used for malware infection. An example of this would be Mirai botnet that attack DNS servers. Now, bot herders are criminals who manage botnets. So that could be groups or individuals. And again, their incentive would be monetary gain or financial gain. Rootkits are groups of programs that is hidden in the system, and it's usually not detected by anti-malware. It's used to compromise system level access. They are a lot harder to remove because it is accessing at root level or kernel level, which is for the OS, that is a protected area where the user doesn't even have access to. And in some cases, it's used to inspect RAM, and it's used to manipulate processes, so that would discover for the hook processes. And in the case where if you have rootkit, you have to refer to the resources that will be provided by some anti-malware company in order to remove the rootkit. If it is detected, usually the anti-malware should quarantine it, and you should not go and delete the file that's infected, because all the malware infection is usually impacting your system file. And if you delete your system file, it will cause the corruption to your operating system, in which you will no longer have access to resources. You might have error in certain applications, or even not able to access your operating system itself. So in the case of spyware and adware, it takes up a lot of the resources, but in the case of rootkit, it would disable your system, and it also get into the kernel side, in that it would infect more than just from the application side, where we can also, it would be a lot more difficult to contain. So in the case of an infection to a system in a network, you want to physically disconnect that system from the network. So let's say that if you have a laptop that's being infected and it's, the you would get a warning from the anti-malware, then what you need to do is you need to physically disconnect the cable that's attached to that system or turn off the network connectivity to that system so that way it doesn't spread. And then you need to look at if it has spread to a certain area, like a segment of a network. And if it hasn't spread to the segment of the network, then you can start containing that system. So in such case, we would deal with it like an incident response, where we would write up a report and we would look at the assets that are being impacted. So for example, if it's corrupting 10 of the files that you need for your department financial information, then we have to really assess that equates out to the dollar on how much money that we would need to rebuild that file or how that file would impact our business operation, what kind of money is lost in the file corruption. So for the next few questions, we can say that for the purpose of malware is to monitor the user's computer and the system and the user's activity. And for question 8, botnets. Botnets are network of software robots. It's used to look for information on the web or access resources on the system, or sometimes it's used to launch malware attacks. So now switching to common attacks. And most of the attacks use social engineering, which is a practice of using social tactics to gain information, human trickery, and some of the tactics would be using flattery or conning, gaining trust with the individual to provide access information, um, assuming certain position of authority. They would show up, wearing uniforms or pretend to be from a certain organization with a certain title so that way people would trust them. Encourage someone to perform risky action. So there's some motivation for that person to, or encourage someone else to be able to commit a crime or, access data, leave system open, log in, and, trying to look for certain files or resources. Encourage for review of sensitivity of the information, even impersonating someone from the inside. And often you would see this in movies where people would pretend to be janitors because janitors have physical access to all rooms. And so in that, we have to look at how we survey our facility, and we want to make sure that in the high clearance, high secret area, you often see that there would also be other individuals there, so a person cannot be alone by themselves. So impersonation logically and physically can be challenging to detect. So in security, we always want to address the physical and the logical security at the same time. Tailgating, meaning that they can wait at the door, pretend that they forgot their keys, they would follow someone in. So that would follow authorized personnel by providing credentials. And in this, what you need to do is really address a lot of these issues is we want to train our users. We want to train the individuals, make them aware that potentially they could be at risk, and someone can motivate them to commit risky actions, to call them on the phone and ask for access information to establish trust by authority, etc. So training is essential, and making sure that people understand, educate the individuals is very crucial in cybersecurity. So in the notes, it talks about social engineering and impersonation. Sometimes could be people can be shoulder surfing, where they can look over someone's shoulder for password um, or for sensitive information. Hoax are fake email messages or messages that would attempt to scare the user, so they would use tactic to create unreal threats, and that can spread very quickly. So what we can do with this is, on our email exchange server, we can filter out, right? You can set rules in that it would block the messages, so that way it doesn't even get to some of the employees. And then for tailgating, we can implement man trap, which is turnstile. Those are rotating wheels, so we can have one person coming in. We can also train our users. And then we want to make sure that we survey. And dumpster diving is where people would go through the trash or the recycling container to obtain documents or dispose materials that could be useful. So to really address this, we want to make sure that we shred media like SD cards, CD, DVD, storage devices. When we dispose, we gotta make sure that we puncture holes through them, so that way they don't get reused. Um, so discarding hardware is as important as discarding paper. And so they have companies that can properly discard them for you, in that they can shred the document, they can shred the media, and they can dispose that for you safely. But in the case where you don't have those type of organization, we want to make sure that we use shredding machines, where we want to shred it multiple times, so that way it cannot be glued back together. And also we want to make sure that we have lights and physical protection for our dumpster area, in that it needs to be locked, secured, where external individual cannot go in and start getting things out of the trash and the recycle container. Waterhole attack it includes attempts in discovering which website that the people like to visit, and they will infect those websites or add malware to those websites, so that way it can spread to the user. So the website would entice the user to come and use it, and then there will be malware that will be installed, so that way it can infect the system. Spam is unwanted solicited email, and so you often see spam coming from email, and you can set up rules for your email mailbox or your email server to block spam. Phishing is a practice of sending messages to the user. Now it's coming in from more than email, it can come in from text messages, with the purpose of tricking them in revealing personal information. Like, help me, I am trapped, I need some money, or you won so much money, please give me your bank account information and I will deposit the check. So phishing can be very damaging, especially their intention usually is financial gain. And in order to have the financial access, they usually want credential information. So we want to train the user to look out for email that look like from friends, right? So email content, email source, that's also important to train the user how to really detect that. Phishing can be used to install malware. So we want to validate email address, and phishing, most of the time they try to get money. Now spear phishing would be targeted a specific individual or group. So, for example, they would try to target CEOs of company or specific group of employees by having certain advertisement, have the user fill out information like company picnic, health benefits. That's very common, updating health benefits, because every company would offer their employees health benefits. So spear phishing would aim toward a specific group compared to regular phishing is for the general. Then we have whaling. Whaling is a form of spear phishing, and it's aimed toward higher executives like chief of financial, director of finance, or CEO, CIO, CTO, the C's. And then vishing with a V is a way to trick the user to give up personal and financial information over the phone. So that's really voice phishing. So we call it vishing. They would call and they would say that they're from Dell or Microsoft. They need to have access to your system. Please give them the username and password, etc. So we should not trust anyone calling from the phone, or even from, IRS. Don't call people out of the blue. So voice phishing is used a lot of the time for monetary gain. So in the assignment for question 9, it asks about the common techniques in social engineering, and that would include flattery or conning, assuming position from authority, encourage someone to perform risky action, encourage someone to reveal sensitive information, impersonating someone from the inside, so that way that person is trusted, tailgating or following unauthorized personnel without having any credential. And for question 10, what occurs in a waterhole attack? That will be attempts to discover which website the people are likely to visit and infect this website with malware, so that way it can spread to the user system. So you can find this on page 2 of your notes. For question 11, it asks you what's the difference between whaling and spear phishing? And whaling targets executives, whereas spear phishing targets specific groups of users. So whaling is a form of spear phishing, but whaling only targets executive of organizations. For question 12, it asks you what is a vishing, which is voice phishing. This is a social engineering tactic to obtain information via phone calls. So for 13, it asks you what should you do to protect systems from malware. We want to install anti-malware applications. We can run updates and scan. We want to educate the user and train them to be aware of scams and internet resources. We want to educate the users of the system. This concludes part 1 of my video. Please look at part 2 of my video, in which I will cover the rest of the assignment and the lecture notes.